Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. A year ago, on the 5th of August, the central government decided to abrogate the constitutional provisions that provided autonomy to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The Modi government contended that doing that would actually help the state economically, developmentally, it would end terrorism, and would largely be a big step forward for the people of Kashmir and for the area itself. 12 months later, what is the situation on the ground, both in terms of where the economy is at and what's happening with the people of Kashmir? Joining me to talk about that is Junaid Azim Mattu. He's former mayor of Srinagar and former Minister of State for Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you, Junaid, for joining in. This week marks a year to, when things took a very, very big turn in Jammu and Kashmir. The abrogation seemed to be, at that point, from the government's point of view, a step towards development and economic growth. And I want to focus on that in the first part of our conversation. 1 year has gone
Okay.
by. Where would you say Kashmir is at this point on both those metrics in terms of economic growth and how development has moved?
Well. To be very honest, we haven't seen much stability in the last 12 months. Uh, in the post 5th August scenario, we lost a few months to restrictions and curfews, and life certainly wasn't normal. And then that was soon followed with by the COVID issue.
Yeah.
So the last 12 months haven't seen even bare minimum economic activity. We depend a lot on tourism. Our manufacturing sector is very small because of the type of topography and the logistics issues that we have. So we depend heavily on service industries like the tourism industry, and some MSMEs. So the economic devastation in the last 12 months has been two pronged. One, because of the political uncertainty, and then because of the COVID crisis. We've literally seen almost no tourists,
Yeah.
and there hasn't been a lot of impetus on small scale industries. There have been no investments. So when we talk about what happened on the 5th of August, and we might kind of portray it to be as a step towards the opening of investment avenues for J&K. But as a student of economics, the first variable that you need is stability. In any economy,
Yeah.
political stability, institutional stability, and we haven't had that in the last year.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there has been any positive activity on the economic or the developmental front.
Yeah.
I think basic governance too has somehow suffered a bit. Again, to be the devil's advocate, we've had to deal with the post 5th August repercussions and the COVID crisis simultaneously.
Yeah. Let's try and put some numbers to our conversation, Junaid, and I'm going to take up those verticals, for Kashmir's economy, whether it's tourism, transport to a lesser degree, and of course, a few others like the orchardists. There is an estimate that's been put out by the Kashmir Chamber of Commerce saying that economic losses in the valley stand at 40,000 crores.
At least, I don't find any reason to disagree with the numbers of the chamber. They're a responsible body. I'm sure they've done their homework. But in terms of output, in terms of production output, in terms of revenue, in terms of all economic vectors that you might actually consider to ascertain the economic impact post 5th of August, a 50% slowdown seems to be understating the problem.
How much would you reckon it's been?
I would say it's at least 70%, 60 to 70%.
Hmm. Draw that imagery for me, Junaid, in terms of what's happened with tourism, trending from 2018, where tourism had actually picked up in a big way for the valley, to 2019,
Yeah,
where some of this trouble started, and of course in 2020, where tourism has been decimated, nationwide and globally.
yeah. Well, you're right. It's been decimated nationwide and globally. So post March, there's been no tourism anywhere, to be very honest. But as I said, it's been a double whammy for us. It's not just been the COVID issue.
Yeah.
It's been the fact that from August to March, the previous year August to this year March, when the COVID crisis hit, we had no tourism. Um, so tourism is, we do tend to overstate our dependence on tourism. If you look at the numbers, the contribution, percentage-wise contribution of tourism to our GDP isn't enormous. Uh, Horticulture probably is far greater than tourism, but horticulture has suffered too.
Yeah.
Again, because of logistics, and again because of lockdowns and curfews and instability. And you go back to the root of the problem. That Kashmir will do well only if there is political stability, and we've seen that. If you look at how our economy has done in the last 20 years, the only periods of growth in our economy have been periods where we have seen reasonable political certainty and stability, and a decline in violence.
Mm,
While we didn't see a lot of violence in the last 12 months, but it would be a lie to say that there is political certainty
mm.
in at least in Kashmir Valley. Uh, so talk about tourism, talk about the transport sector, talk about horticulture, uh, and tourism and horticulture being the mainstays of our economy. I think there has been widespread devastation across the board. I think the government did come up with MSPs and some support initiatives for horticulture. But again, those are measures that we know by their very nature cannot substitute an open kind of an open market, which our horticulturists could have access to.
Yeah.
So both sectors have faced a devastating slump.
No, you're absolutely right, Junaid. I mean, I was going through the data for the Apple industry, for example, which is a 10,000 crore market for
Yes.
for your union territory now. Uh, and the bigger sort of underlining in that is that it accounts for 27% in terms of employment. Aside from what kind of revenue damage you're looking at, what is the what's the situation right now for employment really for people?
Horrible. We don't come out with unemployment figures and job loss figures. Uh, we as a system don't tend to do that much. But especially so in Kashmir, unemployment is something that, we've gotten used to. So we don't tend to monitor it from time to time. We don't have employment exchanges functioning. There is no unemployment registry. But the very fact that you mentioned the horticulture sector, the Apple industry, uh, you know, employment generation in the horticulture sector is also at different tires. You have the horticulturists, then you have the packing industry, right? Then you have the cold storage industry, and then you have the transport industry. So from the orchard to the retail, or orchard to export, there are so many other allied industries which are suffering too. So if you say the 27 lakh people depend on horticulture, again, you cannot overstate that number. It could be higher, because now you have cold storages, now you have packaging, aspects to it. So the number tends to be higher. Then you have the dry fruit industry. Then you have the handicrafts industry,
Yeah.
and again, that's a huge industry. At least used to be a huge industry, in Kashmir at least. And again, that's suffering because that's so closely intertwined with the tourism industry. So it's a very complicated economic scenario. We are not. I think, as with all tourist cities, the economy of a tourist dependent union territory or city or state is so complicated, because there are so many aspects to it. You have handicrafts, and that depends on the tourism industry. And then we are a UT now with some sort of a political uncertainty. And the Apple industry is very sensitive to logistical disturbances,
Mhm.
because it's a perishable,
True.
produce.
Yeah.
So logistics again is directly defined by certainty, by lockdowns, by curfews. A delay in transporting your produce to, let's say, Delhi or Punjab could cost you, whatever profit an orchardist could make. So it's extremely complex and complicated, and there's nothing that seems to be kind of coming as a reprieve for the average orchardist or the average handicrafts, um, person, or for somebody who runs a houseboat or has a small little boutique hotel. So there seems to be no sense of reprieve.
There is also some irony to the situation, Junaid, because ostensibly the reason by the central government was to better the development for Jammu and Kashmir. But if you actually look at a lot of the parameters on development, whether it's the poverty head count, the human development, Kashmir was actually well above the national average. Given what,
Yes.
yeah, so given what people have experienced through the last year, would you say that much more damage has been done on some of these parameters, whether it is poverty or human development, purely because, as you pointed out, of complete lack of access to anything, employment or otherwise?
Well, yes. I mean, when you talk about the political decisions that were taken on the 5th of August, obviously, one of the main arguments was that this will usher J&K into a corrective era of development, accountability, growth, prosperity. And that is an argument that remains to be proven. I'm not saying that it can't be proved, and this argument is per se dismissed. But if you look at the last 1 year, my argument is simple: that you can make institutional changes, you can make legislative changes, you can go towards liberalization and opening up of an economy. But as a student of economics, until you have political stability, no amount of legislation, no amount of liberalized regulations, no amount of facilitative measures as far as laws are concerned will help till the term you have political stability in a region. And that's something that's a basic for an economy to flourish. And we haven't seen that political stability or certainty. There is this sense of anxiety. There is this sense of apprehension that what's next. And the decision of the 5th of August, whether it proves to be economically beneficial to J&K or not, is an argument that still remains to be proven.
Mm. In many ways, Kashmir was in a more difficult spot, Junaid, when the pandemic hit, because it was almost like a lockdown within a lockdown, with not enough access to, the kind of health facilities you needed or the kind of connectivity you needed. You were sort of running things for Srinagar, for a long period of time. What's your sense of, where things stand in terms of handling the pandemic, the breakout itself, whether people have ready access to healthcare, whether people have ready access to reaching out and communicating when they need help or advice?
Well, we started off nicely. We were included in one of the 10 best cities in the country in our response to COVID. And I remember receiving calls from the biggest municipal corporations in the country asking for our best practices to be shared with them. And we did that. And initially, Srinagar did fairly well. But somewhere down the line, we did get overwhelmed. And I'm not just saying this because I'm out of power, but somewhere down the line, we did kind of lose track of how scientifically to deal with COVID. And we started focusing on institutional and hospital quarantine of asymptomatic patients. So our hospitals started getting overwhelmed. And the argument that asymptomatic patients and those with mild symptoms don't need to go to hospitals fell on deaf ears. And we started focusing on a lot of distractions and diversions. We did not augment our healthcare infrastructure. And when I say that with a realization that J&K has one of the shoddiest healthcare infrastructures in the country. We have not invested significantly in our healthcare structure. As well as an economy, as a country, we don't invest a lot, as a percentage of our GDP. I think we're the lowest in the developed or developing world in investing in our healthcare. Now take that and take a 10 percentage of investment of that. That's what J&K invests in healthcare. Most of the hospitals we have are predate the independence. So in J&K, the only option is prevention. We cannot overemphasize the fact that our healthcare infrastructure is inadequate. So I think that the administration is trying to do as well as it can. The people at the societal level also need to understand the gravity of COVID, more so given the fact that our healthcare infrastructure is not as advanced as other cities. So I keep reiterating this, that the people need to cooperate with the administration, and the administration too needs to come up with a scientific, a sustainable, and a systematic kind of long drawn approach to deal with COVID, especially in a place like, let's say, the valley, because we are in for our winter months very soon. And from all accounts, it seems like COVID kind of flourishes in colder climates. Uh, so I don't think we have done terribly, but I think the last couple of months we seemed to have lost track, and we could do better. There is a lot of scope for improvement.
Mm. And within all of this, you are dealing with severe internet curbs, Junaid. Given the kind of tourism, the kind of sectors that you have for industry, whether it's tourism, whether it's the orchardists, the courier services as well, again, very big.
Yeah.
Give me a sense of how much this internet blockade has impacted lives. Because I think till the pandemic hit, people didn't realize how important it is and what the impact can be when you don't have access to that kind of connectivity.
Well, hugely enormous impact. One, the lack of a functional internet is noticed more in situations like these.
Yeah.
I used to, when I was in office, I used to meet a lot of doctors and researchers and epidemiologists, and they said that if they had high-speed internet on their phones, it would really be an asset in kind of, being up to date and kind of reading up and sharing case studies with their colleagues in the rest of the world. Um, and the reason that we keep getting for not having 4G internet is that somehow it will, be misused. Well, where is internet not misused? Name one city in the world where internet is not misused. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And there are ways and means in which you can restrict the misuse of the internet by terrorists or people inimical to peace. And I believe it was a lost opportunity. When I was the mayor of Srinagar, I conveyed it as back as 5 months, that when the COVID crisis started, it was a golden opportunity for the state to show its magnanimity and sensitivity and say that, we are facing a crisis and we are going to restore 4G internet. I think that was a huge opportunity that was missed to reach out, especially to the youth, because it's very rare in a place like Kashmir, which is torn apart by conflict, for the youth demographic to ask for something very specific.
Yeah.
When you look at the demands and the aspirations and the expectations of especially the younger people, they're vague and they're aspirational and they're ideological. But this was the first time that the youth was asking for something very specific in particular, and I think that should have been done. So the impact has been huge on education as well. People can't work from homes, and online classes which schools have started, they're very hard to kind of be participatory because not a lot of people have broadband at their homes. It still remains a luxury, and the lack of 4G still remains an eyesore in the eyes of the youth. I don't know what is the rationale. I don't know why is it so hard to restore it, but I hope that it is restored. Better late than never.
Mm. You look tired, Junaid, and I know this may seem like a naive question, but how are the people of Kashmir feeling? It's been a year. The sense one gets from the outside is that there's a lot of bitterness and despair that is unresolved, that remains bottled up. Um, where are people in the arc of getting back to some kind of normalcy in their lives?
Well, I mean, first of all, personally speaking, I am very tired because in the middle of the pandemic, we've had to deal with the mayoral elections, the floor tests, and a month and a half of craziness on account of that. Um, but people generally are psychologically fatigued, if I may. There does seem to be a sense of despondency and kind of anxiety and apprehension. It is not very normal for a state to be downgraded into a union territory. I think we live in a era of upgrades, and we live in an era where states are bifurcated into two states. and statehood demands are met, as we saw in so many states like Telangana or Chhattisgarh or Uttarakhand. And in that era, for a state to become a union territory has obviously been seen as a demoralizing, spiteful insult. You talk about the decisions of the 5th of August, the legislative actions of the parliament. That's one debate. But downgrading a state into a union territory uh, has been seen as a demoralizing factor. So the people are fatigued. There is no doubt about it. There have been indications that the center is willing to reconsider the restoration of the statehood, but there has been no concrete and visible kind of movement on that front. The people are also, frankly speaking, tired and fatigued because of the COVID lockdown, and I think that's true with everywhere in the country. But the people of the valley have had their fair share of fatigue since the last 3 decades. So whenever you kind of add a couple of more grains in that bowl of fatigue, it tells more than people, in the other parts of the country would portray. So they obviously the people of the valley would seem more fatigued.
You mentioned earlier in our chat, Junaid, that there's actually been a spike in terms of violent unrest. There is very, very strong political uncertainty that is hanging. What do you worry about the most in the months to come as things unfold within this region? What worries you the most?
Well, no, there has been no significant spike in violence. Again, let's be honest. There have been no fatalities, civilian killings, or no processions. Militancy, you know, talk to some people, they'll say it's on the decline because more terrorists are being neutralized. Uh, but talk to some people and they'll quote the same figures and say, well, if they're being neutralized in greater numbers, that means they exist in greater numbers. Um, but I I don't think there has been a spurt in violence. Uh, but in a place like Kashmir, when it becomes too quiet, that's also cause for concern and worry. The lull before the proverbial storm. A lot of things are pent up. The people certainly, if anybody tells Delhi and the decision makers in Delhi that there is absolutely nothing to worry about in Kashmir and everything is hunky dory, I think that person should be considered to be an enemy of the nation, because that's a big fat lie. Something needs to be done in J&K promptly. An initiative does need to be taken promptly, and I hope that happens. But as of now, my biggest fear and apprehension is that it doesn't take long for things to spiral out of control in the valley. All of us have seen that. It's a tinderbox waiting for a spark. So I hope that things are not taken for granted. I fear that they might be taken for granted. Uh, so one really kind of expects that we understand that Kashmir needs to be dealt with statesmanly and kind of in a magnanimous manner, and there needs to be some outreach and some sort of a balm over the insult of downgrading the state into a union territory.
They remain very open wounds, though, Junaid. I mean, Umar Abdullah was incarcerated for over 200 days. As we speak, Mehbooba Mufti still is. Senior Congress leader Mr. Saifuddin Soz as well. How do people within the region read that? And is it important for them to see a resolution on that for those wounds to heal?
Well, absolutely. Our party chairman, Mr. Sajad Lone, was just released after nearly a year in detention. And I just met him a couple of days ago. And this is very surreal. These are mainstream leaders, on the shoulders of whom the very idea of India is pivoted in at least the valley. And these people have spent nearly a year in detention. Some of them have been officially under detention, some have been unofficially under detention. Um, uh, but it is clearly strange. Will the wounds remain? Well, we saw that the wounds of 1987 remained. The rigging of 87 that manifested itself far later. It takes 10 years for something to manifest in terms of strife and violence on the ground. And 87 continued to manifest itself even as late as in 2005. We saw how what happened in the 90s, which was a very tumultuous period in Kashmir, that continues to define the political landscape in Kashmir even now. So it's far early to say how will the 5th August development manifest itself in terms of the psychological impact, in terms of the sense of hurt that the mainstream might feel, the people associated with the mainstream might feel, or the people in general might feel. That can manifest itself, even 20 years from now. And we have seen that happening.
Finally, Junaid, sometimes we overthink decision making. We sit on it for so long that it just becomes bigger and bigger in our heads. If you were to go to the center and put out, three immediate points of address that you think need to be rectified immediately to cause some relief, even in interim for the region, what would they be? What is it that needs to be done with urgency?
Well, first and foremost, obviously, this is the stated position of all mainstream political parties, including ours, the People's Conference, is the reversal of all decisions that were taken on the 5th of August. And I do understand that that's a quasi-legal process because we are all petitioners in the Supreme Court, and that is also a legislative process. But I hope eventually that is what we are all aiming at. But in the interim measures include the restoration of statehood. Interim measures include, the release of all mainstream leaders from detention and allowing them to carry out their political activities, irrespective of the divergence and differences in ideology. We are still a democracy. I think the mainstream in J&K needs to be allowed the right to exercise mainstream politics. Because if they aren't allowed to exercise mainstream politics, however unpalatable that might be, you are ceding space to separatist, violent politics. So I hope that number two, that release the mainstream politicians, allow them to carry out their political activities, to demand what they want to demand, to even protest and dissent against decisions that have been taken. And three, take measures to restore the credibility and the dignity of the idea of India in a place like Kashmir. Take measures which kind of give an impression to a young Kashmiri that he's as much an Indian as somebody else in the country, and he's respected. His aspirations, his expectations, his or her dreams are as cherished and as valuable to the entire country as a counterpart in Pune or Bangalore and Bombay. And in small steps like restoration of 4G and pro-developmental initiatives, employment initiatives. But these are all interim measures. As I said, the mainstay again remains, the pivotal thing remains, and this is the stated position of all mainstream parties, including ours, is the reversal of all decisions that were taken on the 5th of August. And I do understand that's a far long-term and comprehensive project. So the three things I kind of suggested could be interim measures which could be started immediately. And I think something does need to be started immediately to pave way for a kind of an eventual redressal of grievances which may have arisen because of what was done on the 5th of August.
Thank you, Junaid. I appreciate you joining in. I know it's been a crucial 12 months, and I agree with you. Many steps back have happened rather than forward. And the time is now to act with grace and empathy, frankly, for the center. I hope they're listening.
Yes.
Thank you again for joining in.
Thank you, Mitali. Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.